Here is the version of prehistoric life almost everyone carries in their head. The cave, the spear, the mammoth, the cold. A world where every sunrise was not a promise, but a test. You wake up hungry. You move because staying still means starving. You follow animals across frozen ground. You sleep under stone, skin, branch, or open sky. You do not have a hospital waiting somewhere beyond the trees. You do not have antibiotics. You do not have surgery. You do not have a pharmacy, a retirement plan, a social safety net, or even a written map that tells you where safety begins. You have your body. That is the machine. And in the story, most people imagine that machine only matters while it is young. Young enough to run, young enough to hunt, young enough to carry, young enough to keep up when the group moves. Because in that version of the prehistoric world, the moment your knees started failing, the moment your eyesight blurred, the moment your hearing weakened, the moment you could no longer match the pace of younger bodies moving across a dangerous landscape, nature collected its debt. And you were done. Which makes one fact genuinely difficult to explain. Old people were there. Not just a few lucky survivors. Not just one person who somehow made it through one strange winter. We have fossil evidence of elderly individuals scattered across prehistoric populations. People with severe arthritis. Multiple healed fractures. Teeth worn almost flat. Degenerative joint disease visible in their bones. Bodies that had clearly lived through decades of strain, injury, hunger, weather, infection, and hard movement. Some lived into their 40s, some into their 50s, and in a surprising number of documented cases, people reached their 60s and 70s. In prehistory, without modern medicine, without clean operating rooms, without painkillers in a plastic bottle, without glasses, without hearing aids, without anyone saying, "You can stop working now." These people were old, genuinely old, physically old, and they were alive. So the question is not just, how long did prehistoric people live? The better question is much stranger. How did old people survive in a world that seemed built to remove them? Before we can answer that, we have to kill one of the most persistent myths about human history. You have probably heard it before. People back then only lived to, 25. It gets repeated everywhere. In documentarias, in pop science videos, in casual conversations by people who say it with the confidence of someone closing the case. And at first, the numbers seem to agree. Average life expectancy in many prehistoric populations appears to fall somewhere around 30 to 35 years. So that sounds simple. People were born. They struggled. They died young. Case closed. Except that is not what the number means. Because an average is not a life story. An average can hide the shape of an entire world. And in prehistoric populations, the average was dragged down by one brutal force more than anything else: child mortality. In the Paleolithic, a devastating number of children died before reaching their 15th birthday. Many died in the first 5 years of life. Not because prehistoric humans were weak, but because early childhood was an almost unimaginable gauntlet. Infections that today might be cleared with a basic course of antibiotics could become fatal. Parasites could drain a child's strength. A fall, a river, a bad season, an animal encounter, a fever, or a disease we now vaccinate against in infancy could end a life before it ever reached adulthood. That is what average life expectancy is measuring. It is not saying every adult dropped dead at 30. It is saying that so many children died young. The average collapsed under the weight of those early deaths. Imagine a small group. Several children die before age 5. A few more never reach adolescence. But the ones who survive that first dangerous stretch grow into adults. They learn the landscape. They absorb tools, routes, plans, animal signs, seasons, and social rules before they are even fully grown. And some of them keep going. 30, 40, 50, 60. The world did not become safe for them, but they had passed through the deadliest gate. Researchers studying hunter-gatherer populations have found something that cuts directly against the popular myth. Among people who survived childhood, adult death often clustered far later than the average suggests. The real story was not that everyone died young. The real story was that childhood was dangerous enough to distort the numbers. And once you understand that, the prehistoric world changes shape. It is no longer just a world of young hunters and fast bodies. It is also a world with elders. People who had survived droughts before. People who had seen bad winters before. People who remembered where the water remained when the obvious streams disappeared. People who knew which plants healed, which plants harmed, and which signs in the sky meant the group needed to move before the weather turned. But that opens the deeper problem. If old people survived, it still does not explain why the group kept them alive. Because a prehistoric band was not a charity organization. Every calorie mattered. Every hour of labor mattered. Every mouth had a cost. So what could an aging body offer once speed faded? What could a person give when strength was no longer their strongest weapon? The answer is the thing modern humans keep forgetting. In a world with no writing, no books, no maps, no databases, and no way to store information outside a living brain, old people were not the weak link. They were the memory system. And in the next part, that memory becomes the difference between a group that guesses and a group that survives. That difference begins with a simple fact. Modern life has made almost invisible. Knowledge can live outside you now. You can write it down, save it, search it, upload it, store it in a cloud server you will never see. A person can die, and their information can remain behind in books, records, maps, archives, photographs, videos, and databases. But for most of human existence, none of that existed. There was no written record waiting beside the fire, no map scratched with reliable scale, no medical manual, no weather forecast, no field guide telling you which root could be eaten, which leaf could calm a fever, and which berry would make a child violently sick before sunset. Information had only one storage device, a living brain, and the longer that brain had been alive, the more dangerous seasons it had already survived. This is where age stopped being a weakness and became something much stranger. A young hunter might be faster, a young forager might walk farther, but an elder could look at a dry riverbed and remember the last time water disappeared this early. They could remember which direction the animals moved. They could remember which valley still held shade. They could remember the year the group waited too long, and what it cost them. That kind of memory is not trivia. It is survival data. It tells a group when to stay, when to move, what to eat, what to avoid, when to risk a hunt, when to conserve strength, when a cough is ordinary, and when it means something worse is moving through the camp. In a world without writing, old people were not just people with memories. They were the memory system itself. And the most important part is that this knowledge did not move through lectures. It moved through story. Not story as entertainment only. Story as technology. A repeated account of the year the water failed. A warning about the plant that looked harmless until 3 children ate it. A remembered path through a landscape that only worked in one season. A lesson hidden inside a hunting story. A migration story. A death story. A survival story. The fire was not just a place to get warm, it was where the group backed up its memory. One voice at a time. And this is why old age could become valuable even after raw strength declined. An elder did not need to outrun a deer to help the group eat. They needed to remember when the deer stopped coming through this valley and where they went instead. They did not need to carry the heaviest load. They needed to know which journey was worth taking. But memory was only one layer. There was another, even more direct form of survival value. Food. Consider the Hadza people of northern Tanzania. One of the last surviving hunter-gatherer cultures, still studied by anthropologists. Among the Hadza, researchers notice something that does not fit the simple idea that reproductive age is the only age that matters. Older women. Women past the age of bearing children were not sitting at the edge of the group doing nothing. They were working hard. They dug tubers. They gathered food. They contributed directly to the calories that kept children alive. In some observations, these grandmothers were among the most consistently productive foragers in the community. That matters because human children are expensive. Not emotionally expensive, biologically expensive. A human child is slow to grow, slow to learn, and helpless for an unusually long time compared with many other animals. A mother nursing, carrying, feeding, protecting, and teaching one child has less energy for the next one. But when a grandmother steps in, the equation changes. She can feed a child, watch a child, teach a child, dig food while the mother recovers, carry part of the burden that would otherwise fall on one exhausted body. This is the core of the grandmother hypothesis. Menopause may not be evolution simply running out of function. It may be part of a deeper strategy. Instead of investing energy in producing more children directly, older women redirected energy into keeping existing descendants alive. Their daughters' children, their own genetic future, already breathing in front of them. In evolutionary terms, this is cold but powerful. A grandmother does not need to have another baby for her genes to spread. She can increase the survival odds of grandchildren who already carry pieces of her. She can help her daughter have another child sooner. She can turn experience, food, and care into descendants, not by giving birth again, by making sure the children already born do not die. This changes what old age means. It is not just decline. It is redistribution. Strength moves away from direct reproduction and toward the survival of the group's youngest members. And once you see that, the shape of human life starts to look less accidental. Why would a species evolve such long dependency in children? Why would women live for decades after reproduction ends? Why would groups tolerate older bodies that could no longer match the speed of youth? Because those older bodies were doing work the group could not afford to lose. They were feeding children, training children, remembering disasters, carrying medicine in memory, carrying maps in memory, carrying the difference between a bad decision and a survivable one. This is where the old prehistoric story begins to break apart completely. The group was not keeping elders alive because nature was gentle. Nature was not gentle. They kept them alive because experience had become a resource. And in a world with no external storage, losing an elder could mean losing the only surviving copy of knowledge the group might need next winter. But that still leaves one harder question. It is one thing to value a grandmother who can forage, teach, and help children survive. It is another thing to care for someone who can barely move, someone injured, someone half-blind, someone who cannot hunt, cannot travel easily, cannot defend themselves well, and may cost more calories than they return. If prehistoric groups were really making hard survival calculations, What happened to those people? The answer is buried in a cave in northern Iraq. And his name is Shanidar I. In 1957, archaeologists working in Shanidar Cave, in what is now the Kurdistan region of northern Iraq, uncovered the remains of a Neanderthal male. He was not young. For a Neanderthal living through the Pleistocene, he was old enough for his bones to tell a very different story from the one most people expect. But age was not the shocking part. The shocking part was what he had survived. Shanidar I had serious damage to one side of his face. He was likely blind in one eye. His hearing was badly reduced. One arm had withered from long disuse. One foot had healed in a way that would have left him walking with difficulty. This was not a body built for chasing animals across rough ground. This was not a body built for fighting, carrying heavy loads, or moving quickly when the group had to leave. And yet, he lived. Not for a few days after injury. Not for one lucky season. The bones suggest he lived with these conditions for years. Possibly more than a decade. That is the part that matters. Because a person with those limits does not survive alone in a prehistoric landscape by being tough enough. Toughness does not replace eyesight. It does not restore hearing. It does not make a damaged limb useful again. It does not carry you across dangerous terrain when your body can no longer keep pace. Something else had to be happening. Other people were helping him. They were feeding him. They were moving with him. They were allowing the group's pace, food, and energy to include him. In a small band where every calorie mattered, they kept alive a person who, by the simplest survival math, looked expensive. And that means the math was not simple. Shanidar I forces us to see something uncomfortable and profound. Care is not a modern decoration added after civilization. Care is older. Much older. It reaches back into the world of archaic humans, into caves, migration, hunger, injury, and small groups making hard choices under pressure. And Shanidar I is not alone. Other Neanderthal remains from different places show individuals who survived serious injuries or long-term physical decline. Bones healed. Conditions lasted. Bodies adapted. People who should not have survived without support lived long enough for their skeletons to record time passing after trauma. That is not just endurance. That is social structure. Neanderthals were not using hospitals. They were not writing medical instructions. They were not sterilizing tools under bright lights. But in the most basic sense, they were practicing medicine. They recognized when another body was failing. They responded. They did something that gave that body more time. And there is evidence that this response may have included plant knowledge. Traces found in ancient dental plaque suggest some Neanderthals consumed plants with medicinal properties. Plants that were not simply calories. Maybe they were used to reduce pain. Maybe to calm inflammation. Maybe to help a sick body endure. The exact details are debated. But the larger point is harder to dismiss. Someone had to know which plants were worth using. Someone had to remember. Someone had to pass that knowledge forward. And once again, we return to the same figure sitting near the fire. The older person, the person who had seen sickness before, the person who remembered which treatment helped, which one failed, which one made things worse, and which warning signs meant the group was running out of time. This is where the story stops being only about survival. It becomes about culture. Around 30,000 years ago, the fossil record shows a dramatic rise in the number of people surviving into old age. And soon after, the archaeological record begins to glow with signs of a different kind of human world. Cave art becomes more sophisticated. Burials become more symbolic. Tools become more specialized. Materials begin moving across long distances. Personal ornaments appear. Musical instruments appear. the signs of fully recognizable human culture begin stacking up. For a long time, it was tempting to imagine this as a sudden explosion of intelligence, as if one day the human brain simply switched on. But there is another possibility. Maybe culture did not explode because humans suddenly became smarter overnight. Maybe it exploded because enough old people were finally alive at the same time. Enough memory in one group, enough teachers, enough witnesses, enough people who had seen rare disasters, strange seasons, failed hunts, migration, illnesses, births, deaths, and recoveries. Enough people to keep knowledge from disappearing every time one body died. That changes the origin story. Civilization does not begin only with the strongest hunter. It begins with the person who remembers where the herd went 10 winters ago. The person who remembers how a tool was shaped. The person who remembers the song, the burial, the root, the warning, the cure, the mistake. Old people were not passengers in the development of human civilization. They were the engine. Because knowledge does not become culture just by existing. It has to survive long enough to be taught. It has to be repeated, corrected, tested, carried. And in a world before writing, the only way knowledge survived was for people to survive with it. So the answer to the original question is not one thing. Old people survived because they were protected. They were protected because they were valuable. They were valuable because they carried what no tool, no cave wall, no landscape, and no young body could replace. Accumulated experience. And that experience changed the future. A group with elders did not have to begin from zero every generation. It could inherit decisions. It could inherit warnings. It could inherit maps that existed only in memory. It could inherit survival itself. So there is a version of prehistory where old age is the end of usefulness, where the body weakens and the world moves on. But the deeper story says the opposite. Old age was not the leftover stage. It was the destination, the place where memory became strategy, where care became survival, where experience became culture, not a burden. The whole point,